Well, just start with the short introduction about the title to Iran facing to Taliban. I think it's just interesting to look at two different newspaper. One's which came out in 1998 in a newspaper Arya after Taliban attacked Iran's consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif, killing 11 diplomats and including one journalist. The headline of all newspaper at that time was, "It is a catastrophic event. These are martyrs, and we have to fight against Taliban." And all these subtitles that I highlighted in this newspaper are claiming that, first of all, Taliban is a product of United States in order to undermine Iran's security. And also suggested some hard policy as sending back refugees to Afghanistan to fight against Taliban. And so different narrative came, which I will elaborate later on more or less. So by the way, if you're wondering why there is another picture in this newspaper, Iranian celebrating with Iranian flag, it was at the same time Iran won the wrestling championship. So it was a big celebration in Iran. And as a child, at that time, I can remember more the celebration than the Taliban's attack in Iran's embassy. Later on in 2021, we have another picture which shows the second phase of the Taliban for Iran. It was the time that Taliban visited Iran's foreign ministry, and the foreign minister at that time, Mr. Javad Zarif, welcomed Taliban, and it was very viral in the social media and among Iranian population. They wondered this Iran's pragmatic approach towards Taliban, welcoming them in Iran's foreign ministry. Precisely, Javad Zarif's body language was criticized that he's, accepting them in Iran. And at that time, like many other newspapers, everyone tried to attack reformist and moderate politicians by calling them that they are creating an alliance between a reformist politician in Iran and Taliban. And they used even very interestingly the word Islah Taliban, because in Iran the reformists called Islah Taliban, means reform seeking, and they kind of matched the word Islah, reform, and Taliban together in order to play with the new situation. But before we start looking at the dynamics of the relations, there are some aspects that we have to consider. First of all, in July and August 2021, it was the transition of Iran's executive branch from the presidency of Hassan Rouhani to Ebrahim Raisi. New realities began to emerge on Iran's domestic political environment. So the more hardline politician dominated Iran's political landscape, from the presidency to the Iran's parliament. So it was new internal change, domestic changes. On the other hand, it was the geopolitical changes in the region. United States leaving Afghanistan, and Iran's the failure of nuclear negotiation, and Iran's this famous look east foreign policy, which existed also before, but Iran highlighted as an alternative for their foreign policy, which is important to understand also relations with Taliban. And of course, it is still a sectarian aspects to these relations, which is not on top of the agenda, but it exists. Although some Iranian and authorities in Iran kind of don't like to talk about it, and saying that there is no Sunni Shia issue in Iran at all, in the region at all, and in case there is an issue, it is the hidden hands of enemies who want to, as a conspiracy, who wants to destroy this harmony between Sunni and Shia. But as we will see, there is a sectarian element in the whole scene. Looking back to 1998, the majority of analysis in Iran start by looking at the 1998 the attack to Mazar-e-Sharif, Iran consulate, killing 11 Iranian civilians. You can see pictures of these declared martyrs in Tehran, in one of the streets. And during that time, there were a mixture of opinion regarding how we should deal with Taliban. There were a suggestion from the IRGC, from the Revolutionary Guards, known as CEP-KAS, that they suggested kind of total military action against Taliban. a more moderate sense was from the Iran's army. The general of the commander of the Islamic Republic's army, Abdul Ali Pursaheb, at that time recommended nonetheless selected strikes. And some other politician, as Mr. Rafsanjani, at that time very important figure, as well as Iran's president Khatami, they suggested and recommended negotiation with Taliban and accepting Taliban as part of Iran's, as a neighbor, as part of the reality of Iran's eastern borders. And we know also, I highlighted in my chapter about some cooperation in security-related domains between Iran's Secretary of National Security Council, on that time under Hassan Rouhani, with Taliban by providing some weapons. But they claimed it was only to support Iran's security elements of Iran's eastern border without having an intention to intervene in Afghanistan. And at that time, the supreme leader of Iran, Mr. Khamenei, came and said, we have to leave the Afghans in the hands of Afghani people. So it means without any direct intervention and without any influencing in the Afghans' politics. In 2001, Iran's strategic flexibility led Iran to cooperate with the United States in the military and intelligence forces in removing Taliban regime. Iran also diplomatically supported the United Nations talk on Afghanistan in Bonn and supported the internationally recognized post-Taliban government. It is also important to mention the role of General Qasem Soleimani, who was later on assassinated by the Americans in Iraq, but he supported to establish bases in Panjshir and Bagram in order to assist an anti-Taliban fighter in northern Afghanistan. But as we all know, this romance between Iran and the United States did not last long. Soon Iran was part of the enemies, and Iranians started to work on their own axis of resistance, which continued till today. One clear example is the role that IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, played in Afghanistan by mobilizing Afghan combats under the umbrella of Fatemiyun to fight in Syria on behalf of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in an ongoing civil war against the opposition forces, as well as the Islamic State. But one question was always whether Fatemiyun can play also a role after Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan. It is still too early to answer this question, but immediately in 2021, the media representative of Fatemiyun in Mashhad said that we are not going to fight against Taliban, and he further accused, of course, the United States and Israel want to create a division and disharmony in Afghanistan. So it showed also a general approach, in my opinion, of Islamic Revolutionary Guard and Iran in general to avoid any confrontation with Taliban at the moment, and again to integrating them into their further geopolitical plans. In 2021 August, Iran, after the after the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, Iran faced a very critical situation. In one hand, one of their strategic goals, namely the withdrawal of US and NATO, has been achieved, but also on the other hand, there were some sense of skepticism and concern regarding security in Iran. Just looking at some of newspaper from August and September 2021, it showed exactly this sense of victory and skepticism. For instance, the hardline newspaper Kayhan, close to Supreme Leader, tried to present this as a victory by saying that this is a humiliation for the United States. They call it, as this newspaper, the Operation Escape, and that the United States is discredited in the region. Another newspaper close to Islamic Revolutionary Guard called Javan also talk about Taliban as that they are reform and we are facing a new Taliban, they call it. The moderate and reformist newspaper, on the other hand, emphasize on the humanitarian aspects by saying that the people of Afghanistan are now victims, and we shouldn't forget the people of Afghanistan and the refugee crisis, as it is an important aspect. Very interesting was the newspaper Jumhuri Islami, one of the also important newspaper, which called Taliban a terrorist group, and they emphasized on the aspects that Ahmad Massoud fight against Taliban in Panjshir, highlighted this battle, and they declared Ahmad Massoud is a Shiite and follower of Imam Hussein, therefore he's not going to give up. So it showed these different senses of victory, but also skepticism in the public media, but also among the political elites. We could listen to these different voices. I tried to present different voices from the reformist politician, who clearly said that even some politicians talk about that the state is trying to purify Taliban and present a good picture in order to cooperate with them. But some other politicians mentioned that we have to use this opportunity because it is a clear victory for us. It can be part of Iran's strategic plans in the region. But there were also a clear demonstration regarding the Security Council. And when it comes to Security Council, the main aspect of security issue is the question of border security. And in my chapter, I discussed the border security in two different dimensions. The first one is Iran sees the border as not just geographical border, as a material, but also as an ideological border. So the issue of refugees, the question of Sunni Afghan communities, which is completely unknown among the scholarship. For instance, in this picture, you can see a number of Sunni Afghan refugees living in a periphery area of Mashhad, which is quite under control of the state, which is regulated by the authorities. But nonetheless, they are allowed to have their madrasa, they are allowed to have their mosque, but again, under full control. But it's also another concern in this regard is the issue of extremist group as Al-Qaeda. I highlighted Iran's very problematic relations with Al-Qaeda, and this is something that we probably can discuss in our discussion later on. But one of the main concerns, which is very interestingly discussed by some Iranian scholars in Iran, is that there is this fear that some of Iran's extremist group like Jaish al-Adl or former Jundullah, which was in the province Sistan Baluchistan and operated in this province, they moved to Afghanistan and Pakistan, and there is this fear that they might merge with another extremist group like Islamic State of Khorasan province and to become operationalized and attack Iran's interest in the region and influence Iran's different communities and create a sectarian divide. So this sectarian issue, as I mentioned, is there, but it's still no one likes to talk about it. One example is when one of the illegal migrant from Afghanistan, originally a 20 years old Uzbek, who came to Iran illegally, attacked in Mashhad two Shiite clerics, you can see their picture, in the shrine of Imam Reza. It was one of the very critical attack, and that raised the alarm that these sectarian aspects of after Taliban took over is there and has to be clearly studied and understand. On the geographical border, Iran has there were certain incidents between Taliban and security forces in Iran, but again the authorities and the border guards try to keep it calm and to do not cause an escalation. For instance, in July 2021, after it was an incident around the Islam Qala border crossing, where you can see in this picture from the Iranian side, the army chief Abdurrahim Musavi appeared on the side of the border and said, there is nothing to be concerned about. Everything's okay. And he claimed that there was only a misunderstanding. Again, this point that they want to avoid any conflict or direct confrontation with Taliban. However, Iranians want to use the situation in order to cooperate with the regional actors, as they did in February 2022, by creating a joint working group with Pakistan. And the question of border security is important, especially when it comes to economic relations with Taliban, especially under the current situation. Economic situation is important in Iran. It is important to maintain these relations with Afghanistan. And finally, the question of water security about the Helmand River is very important. And there were also several incidents regarding this water, which is very essential for the people of provinces Baluchistan, and important for the lives of millions of people. And it seems there is no clear agreement on this regard, but both countries in June 2022 emphasized a full implementation of the Helmand Treaty signed in 1973, and to build joint facility and measurement station in order to control the situation. For conclusion, back to this Iran facing to Taliban, we have to say that Iran, on the current situation, has a bi-directional characteristic. In one direction, Iran has to maintain its securitization and the security issues by looking at Taliban as a national security concern. And on the other hand, the new situation in Afghanistan and Taliban can be an opportunity for Iran's wider regional plan, especially in the context of Look East policy. So in that case, Iran has to integrate Taliban into its strategic plans, geopolitical and geoeconomics plan. But there are still, in my opinion, best case scenarios and worst case scenarios which has to be concerned. Nonetheless, I think the main objective from the Iranian side is to create an alliance by developing a mutual interest and common ideological consent for a long-term cooperation. However, I think final decision about to cooperate with Taliban is not only something that the authorities in Iran take it by themselves, but it has also to do a lot with the other actors, especially Russia and China. So in this regard, lots of development is happening, especially lastly in the last week. We know that the Taliban took over the embassy in Tehran, but the Iranians do not talk about it still publicly. But it seems that developing these relations is kind of step by step going through, and that will be my final point. So thank you very much. I think the further issues we can discuss in Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Great presentation. I'm always amazed with the ability of the Islamic Republic to simply follow several different foreign policies at the same time, managed by different parts of the regime, and actually, you know, getting to a decision late in the game. And I vividly remember the big mural when I lived in Iran in the early 2000s. And I think it's still there. I think they have still not painted over it, which is also some signal to the Taliban that, you know, Iran remembers. I'm very much looking forward to continuing this in the Q&A session. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's now my pleasure to introduce and hand over to Dr. Gerhard Conrad for his remarks. Dr. Gerhard Conrad holds a PhD in Oriental Studies, International Politics, and International Law. As a senior member of the German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, he was a mediator in the Middle East, including for the United Nations Secretary General. Until his retirement in 2019, he was the director of the European Union Intelligence Analysis Center, EU INCENT, in Brussels. But he did not really retire, because he currently delivers education on intelligence and politics within the Master's Programs for Intelligence Studies, MISS, in Berlin, at King's College London, and because he likes to travel, also at Sciences Po in Paris. He's a board member of the Foreign Intelligence Services in Germany, an intelligence advisor to the Munich Security Conference, and of course, most importantly, a member of the advisory board of CEP. Dr. Conrad, thank you so much for taking part again in one of our webinars today. I'm very much looking forward to your remarks, and as usual, the screen is all yours.
My dear friend, thank you very much indeed for having me here. Again, it's my pleasure to join in this discussion, sorry, for the implications and ramifications of, let's say, the situation in Afghanistan under the aspect of CT, of counterterrorism, and from the angle of the European Union. You know, in our small study, we had a chapter, Germany and Europe's upcoming fight against terrorism. It was written late in 2021 and then, let's say, updated a bit in 2022. Things had, of course, had been moving forward. We are now on the level of the European Union. We are two councils further on. We had a special European Council just recently on 9th of February 2023, which was not devoted to CT properly, but to migration. And of course, migration and border security is intimately connected with the CT endeavors of the European Union. We had in June 2022, for the time being, the last council on terrorism on the 9th of June, where we can find some conclusions again, invitations, recommendations for member states and the Commission. I will come back to that a little bit later, only to show the notorious, well-known slow pace, very slow pace of the Union, which is not a problem of the European Commission or the Council proper, but it is of course a problem emanating from the attitudes of its member states. The European Union, as all of us know, is the community of the member states and their capability and willingness to engage in proper action. Let's start, first of all, with the developments directly after the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. And indeed, under that aspect, the European Union was very fast, surprisingly fast, because already on 29th of September 2021, the CTC, the Counter-Terrorism Coordinator, came up with a counter-terrorism action plan, streamlining proposals for urgent action to beef up CT capabilities, preventive capabilities of the European Union in order to tackle with possible additional terrorist threats emanating now from the situation in Afghanistan. We already heard a little bit from Mr. Doroh that Afghanistan under the Taliban has a more nuanced attitude, to put it mildly, on jihad, on fighting the enemies of Islam, although we should not consider, of course, now the regime as a kind of terrorist regime, despite all its violence towards its own citizens and other things. They have a let's say, nuanced attitude vis-à-vis Al-Qaeda and vis-à-vis the Daesh. For the time being, the nuances are expressed in mutual killings. But we should not overlook the fact that, given the very difficult situation in Afghanistan, the influx of migrants, of refugees to neighboring countries, but of course, as you know, the tendency to migrate as far as possible and to enter as well the European Union has been vastly energized, vastly increased during the last 1.5 years. I may just quote some small figures. So small they are not, from the recent Frontex report. So in 2022, we had 330,000 irregular border crossings detected, not the undetected ones, of course, in 2022. It's the highest figure since 2016, of course. These are not all poor Afghans, to make it very clear. But we have, of course, so the Syrians and Tunisians, together with Afghans, contribute most significantly to that additional migratory pressure. And of course, the 95 to 99% of all these people are for sure people deserving our hospitality and our care and so on and so forth. But as you know, as all of us know, inside these waves, you find, of course, the whole spectrum of society, the goodies and the less welcome people. And that was anticipated. It was not so difficult to anticipate that kind of wave of immigration by European authorities. And hence, they started to list all the desiderata, all these things which should have already been done before, but now with a renewed urgency should be implemented. And they mentioned especially that the systematic checks on biographical and biometric data of Afghan nationals or other nationals coming from Afghanistan and arriving at the EU's external borders, particularly with regard to the Schengen Information System, to Eurodac, so the dactyloscopic identification, and Europol databases, should really be updated, should be improved, should be technically made available to all authorities. That, in fact, at least based on the available information and possibly new incoming information on persons aiming for crossing the borders, should be as complete as possible in order to avoid double registration. That's more a migratory thing, but to just try to identify at the best way possible all those people who are interested in entering the European Union. As you know, when you are in the Schengen area, you are in principle free to move. So this kind of demands for the border security and the technical maintenance of border security had been repeatedly issued, repeatedly underlined, and again on the occasion of the sad events in Afghanistan, they had been reiterated in a pretty strongly worded manner. And of course, all the rest of capabilities as exchange then on information between the very many national and of course community-based institutions and offices is an additional issue for beefing up, let's say, the capability of the European institutions in safeguarding their area of freedom, security in Europe. And you know, when you are in, it's extremely difficult for authorities, for national authorities, to track your moves if you have no idea on the identity and other data pertaining to the people in question. You know that here as well, language issues play a major role. And you should not be surprised that, of course, the numbers of Dari, Pashto, Urdu, and Farsi speakers in the European Union institutions and its offices is very limited, to put it very mildly. As well as it is in national authority, let's say within the framework of national authorities as well. So that means, again, be it for assisting people who arrive at the borders, but as well assisting, of course, authorities to get a better understanding of what is going on in this milieu, you need to prepare yourself much better than before when you consider the problems lying outside. I remind you that we had a similar problem during the engagement of foreign troops, of European or Western troops in Afghanistan, that again, it was a matter of life and death, just to understand properly and early enough some of the more dangerous plans and ambitions of people who wanted to put our troops and our citizens into harm's way. So again, a seemingly trivial issue, but of course one of a very essential nature, which demands money, which demands engagement, which demands sometimes a new kind of administrative regulations, all day-by-day stuff, not the big political picture, but those things out of which reality is being crafted, be it in the European Union, be it in its member states, be it abroad as well. But we should not and we must not overlook, especially this kind of major capability building. I hope I'm still here.
Hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, that's good, because I just fumbled around on my screen. So here we are. That having said, and we could of course be much more elaborate on that, but time will forbid that. It is a 24 point catalog of steps which was intended to improve capabilities in the European Union, to tackle in a proper way, in a fair way, but as well in a secure way, the security challenges emanating from this kind of enhanced immigration from Afghanistan. I may just add that, of course, a similar challenge is emanating from the Sahel zone today more than ever before, but this is not the topic of our present small discussion. Now, in June last year, the Council conclusions again reiterated the same demands. And invited the Commission and invited the member states, so they invited themselves, to improve, to take practical steps in improving their capabilities, especially when it came to the Schengen border information system and as well the information systems related to the legal entry as well to the European Union, as well as the so-called illegal ones. So that means the entry-exit system, the database entry-exit system, and the database ETIAS. So that these are the two systems which should have been introduced to the European Union and to the border authorities of the European Union as early as 2023, and I just finish with the remark that these systems, which are of course very complex, very demanding, very expensive as well, and especially relying on a coordinated joint approach by member state authorities, budgetary ones as well, technological one, that both systems, which would be essential for obtaining, not safeguarding, first obtaining a solid overview on migration and influx of legal and illegal migrants, will not be in place and operational also during this year. It will be 2024, whenever, just due to the major delays in member states and by providing technology. And so it came to the the special summit in February this year, just the 9th of February, Special European Council, where again the chapter migration played a role, not terrorism, not counterterrorism, played a role, but again, let's say the importance of these control systems and the importance of beefing them up to making them really operational in a proper way had been again underlined. And I may bet with you that if and when we meet in 6 months' time or by the end of this year, we will find the same a similar situation, not the same, a similar situation again. So Europe is progressing, but at a desperately slow pace. And we will have to rely on undeserved luck if nothing serious is going to happen in the 1, 2, 3 years to come, emanating either from the, let's say, area of violence and desperation in Central or Southern Asia, or from the Sahel zone. It's in effect, it's very similar. As you know, we are still and now in face of the major challenge posed by Russia and its war against Ukraine. All these issues are being pushed back in political priority and budgetary priority as well, be it on the national level, be it within the European Union. And on this happy note, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. I may close my short introduction.
Thank you so much, Dr. Conrad. I really appreciate it. There's certainly a lot of action items, and part of the reason why this report was already devised in 2020 was that we were all conscious that after the withdrawal, Afghanistan will go back pretty much where it was in the 1990s, a country far away where strange people do stranger things to other strange people, and that there was a risk, and this was way before the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, that simply capabilities are going to get struck, and they are being struck, and that we needed another push, and hence we thought it was very important to have your voice in the report in order to highlight that just because other things are also bad, bad things remain bad, and we need to have appropriate capabilities to deal with more than one threat at one time. I'm very much looking forward to discussing this further when we come to the Q&A session. So thank you so much for your very informative first introduction. I'm now, of course, looking forward to welcome and hand over to my good colleague and friend, Ellinor Zeino, who's wearing glasses because he just had an eye operation. So thank you, Ellinor. This is above and beyond the Call of Duty this morning. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Dr. Ellinor Zeino is currently the head of the regional program Southwest Asia of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and one of the expert members of the Enquete Commission of the Federal Parliament of Germany on Afghanistan. This commission is mandated to examine 20 years of German international engagement in Afghanistan and to develop recommendations for future large-scale out-of-area operations of Germany. So quite very important work. Between 2018 and summer 2021, Ellinor served, as I said, as the country representative of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung's Afghanistan office in Kabul, and has gone through all the reiterations and horrors of the withdrawal, not only for her staff, but also for closing the office. And I am happy to announce everyone made it out in time and safe, but it was an adventure. Before that, she has worked as an associate director in a private consultancy company for security analysis on the Middle East and Africa, and as the head of the Crisis and Situation Center. She has worked for many years in international cooperation and field research in Morocco, Mauritania, Egypt, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. She holds a PhD from the University of Hamburg and the GIGA German Institute of Global and Area Studies, a master's degree in politics, laws, and economics, as well as an Arabic language degree for lawyers at the University of Passau. Ellinor, wonderful to have you with us today again. I'm very much looking forward to your remarks, and the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Hans. And I also thank our speakers who have well presented and elaborated on Iran's as well as Europe's and Germany's risk assessments and strategies vis-a-vis the new political situation in Afghanistan. So first, I would like to shortly summarize the main points of Mr. Doroh, who has well illustrated how the relations of the Iranian Islamic Republic with the Afghan Taliban have developed from a former enmity into pragmatic neighborly cooperation, tactical flexibility, and at times even direct support of the Taliban leadership. And also, Iran has entered tactical cooperation with Al-Qaeda as an insurance policy. So this has been a remarkable political shift for both sides, as Mr. Doroh has presented. And yet Iran is unsure if the new political situation is an asset or a liability for its security. So the Taliban takeover leaves mixed feelings of victory, insecurity, and unpredictability for Iran's security establishment. And I can also add that this is similar also to the neighbor countries, for example, even the so-called friends of the Taliban like Pakistan or Qatar, who have very mixed feelings now on the new situation in Afghanistan. Partly in line with the Western Afghanistan policy and also similar to the neighbors, Iran hopes to prevent a destabilization or a civil war scenario, as well as a political radicalization in Afghanistan. Iran aims to maintain peaceful economic and functional relations on border security, on resource management, and also as the neighbor countries, Iran is very much worried about mass migration, illegal drug trafficking, religious extremism, and sectarian tensions on its own soil. So Iran pursues a so-called policy of strategy patience, as you mentioned in your report, with the Taliban government, and hopes to develop, as a most optimistic scenario, even mutual interests or ideological consent with the new government. To shortly summarize, before I will join the two presentations, Dr. Conrad's presentation, he illustrated how the new political situation in Afghanistan and also the migration from Afghanistan may in the future impact on Germany's and Europe's security. The lack of intelligence surveillance on the ground can empower terrorist groups in Afghanistan and terrorist networks, and can bring spillover effects to Europe and to Germany in the future. And Dr. Conrad has made in his report a compelling argument that counterterrorism needs a long-term comprehensive approach. And with less sources and access to information on the ground, we need a smart, and also I would call it a complementing cooperation between German, European, international agencies, organizations, and databases. Counterterrorism rarely receives applause from the public. It is most successful when nothing happens. So policymakers and lawmakers need to understand the significance of timely investments in counterterrorism structures, capabilities, and knowledge. It is a vast undertaking. Like Dr. Conrad has shown, it includes vast undertaking like border control, monitoring extremist propaganda, recruiting, early detection of dangerous persons of interest, tracking terrorist financing, that's something where Hans is very much an expert, policing the internet, as well as strategic forecast. And of course, we need the knowledge, the language knowledge and regional knowledge on the region, on the country. So counterterrorism strategy needs to shift from an event-driven strategy to a long-term comprehensive approach, also with guaranteed resources made available. So while Iran upholds the concept of making a threat an opportunity, I see no real opportunity for Europe in the Taliban takeover. The only opportunity for European or German decision makers is to take Afghanistan as a wake-up call to adequately revise and advance its counterterrorism architecture. Because, as Dr. Conrad also mentioned, there will be no free riding and no free lunches for European security. So now taking a comparative look at the Iranian, the regional, and the European risk assessments and strategies vis-à-vis Afghanistan, we see some paradoxical similarities. Until now, no country has officially recognized the Taliban government, but some countries, of course, have become engaged at different degrees, at different levels. But most countries adhere to a wait-and-see policy with some sort of functional cooperation. While being in Kabul, American diplomats sometimes used to mention or to joke that Afghanistan is probably the only country where American and Chinese security interests match. So while this is, of course, quite a simplistic statement to a very complex situation, it underlines that there are many shared interests among otherwise quite antagonist or non-like-minded countries. For example, Iran had very much supported the Doha peace process, and talking to Iranian diplomats both in Kabul but also in Herat, where Iran also has a consulate, they always even stressed that they would promote human rights, women's rights. Quite paradoxical, they were quite on the Western line in this. And they were very much cautious to mention that Iran has no interest in meddling into domestic affairs, that Iran does not want to serve as a model, or the Islamic Republic of Iran is not a model for Afghanistan. So now we see that the shared interest, which is keeping transnational jihadism, criminal networks, migration, and also drug trafficking, keeping that in check. So these are all the shared interests that we see today. And of course, the last point is, of course, it remains to be seen how the Taliban leadership can be held accountable to the anti-terrorism guarantee that they have given in the Doha Agreement of 2020. So to sum this up, I can see that Iran and Europe agree on the worst case scenario, which is preventing civil war or destabilization, but not necessarily on the best case scenario. While Iran has made a more inclusive Afghan government a precondition for recognition, its best case scenario, as Mr. Doroh also has mentioned, is that would be an Afghan government that would become part of its axis of resistance. I would like to conclude my remarks with some follow-up questions to the speakers. And my follow-up questions to Mr. Doroh are, do you see, or are there still substantial voices from Iran calling for an engagement, for example, with Karzai, Dr. Abdullah Masood, and therefore upholding the idea of a more inclusive government? Do you see these voices still in Iran? And also, if you may answer on this, I'm not sure if you have researched on this, but which parts of the Taliban movement do you think would be more inclined towards Iran and which would be more anti-Iran? Because also for Afghanistan or for the Taliban, it's a security risk of engaging with Iran because they are targeted by ISKP, the local Islamic State affiliate. And my follow-up questions to Dr. Conrad is, because you have mentioned the importance of strategic information exchange with the regional countries in your report. And my question would be, which countries should be Europe's first choice and which countries you see rather problematic? And do you see any country who has more accurate information or situation reports? And a second question also would be, because there have been arguments by Western diplomats, but also by the regional countries who are very much concerned that if we isolate the Taliban government completely and disengage, we would push Afghanistan more into the shadow economy, we would push them into terrorist criminal networks. So where do you see the costs of non-engagement and of isolation compared to the cost of engagement? So with these questions, I would like to conclude, and I look very much forward to our debate. Thank you.